Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. Today we have an unusual episode. We have three hosts. Steve Ivona. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Carlos.
We have Steve Lotz.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Steve.
And myself, as usual, Carlos Perone. Today's topic is horror films you should have seen. And by that we mean there's lots of horror films we watch. I would imagine that at least 50 to 75% of the horror films that are out there go straight in the toilet when they come out. Nobody sees them. They're in the theater for a week or two, and then you don't see them again until DVD or Blu-ray comes along. So in the many years that we've been watching films, there's a lot of these horror films that we keep talking about that even some of us haven't seen, and I'm sure most of you out there definitely have not seen. So let's start off with Mr. Steve Ivona. Tell us about one of your unseen horror films.
Well, I think the first one I want to talk about is Return of the Living Dead. And I think just a little backstory, I think the three of us are lucky that we came of age at a time when home video and cable were giving a new life to movies that were overlooked in the theater. And it seems as though around that time in the mid to late 80s, a lot of films came out that were very overlooked in the theater and definitely got their second win, VHS or cable. And for me, one of them is Return of the Living Dead, which came out, I believe, in 1985. I did not see it in the theater. And I saw it at the behest of a friend of mine who loved horror films. And what I love about it is it's a satire. It's a horror film for sure, but it definitely doesn't take itself seriously. I believe it was co-written by John Russo, who was one of the co-writers of the original Night of the Living Dead, and he really injected quite a bit of humor into this film, and it has a great sort of wacky ensemble cast, James Karen, the Pathmark Man.
But it doesn't have any straight relation to the Dead films, the classic Dead films, correct?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Except to say that they treat it as though it was a real event.
Right.
They say, the guy in the beginning, his young trainee, that wasn't just a movie, that this really happened, and, he's going to take him down and show him the canisters of what eventually sets off the entire film. And the movie, it's gory as all hell, and the effects are great. And as I said, it does not take itself seriously, and it's well written, and it's not silly at all. It's one of those films that has an excellent mix of humor and horror.
Now, this has nothing to do with Romero, correct? You have any idea if he endorsed it or anything at all?
I don't think he had anything to do with it. I believe that he and John Russo did not part well.
Yes, I believe Steve is correct based on what I've heard, that they parted ways, and the decision was made to basically retell the story from a different point of view without Romero.
Okay, Steve, what's next on your list?
Well, I'm going to kick it off with a controversial selection. I know one of my counterparts here has something to say about this, but, horror films, to Steve's point, sometimes mix humor. A lot of the good ones do integrate humor because it helps to allow you to watch the film so that you're not just getting slammed over the head with all of these horror elements, and you basically don't have a chance to just take a breath. But the first film that I have is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And for those who haven't seen the film, it essentially has nothing to do with the Halloween series. The famous Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, essentially created the slasher genre in and of itself and was groundbreaking, and was followed up by a sequel, Halloween 2, which Carpenter produced. And this Halloween 3 came along, and I saw it with the intention that it was going to continue the storyline, and it did not whatsoever. And the basic premise was behind this possessed Halloween mask factory, and the name of the company was Silver Shamrock. And they were lauded for the intricate detail of these Halloween masks that they would make, high quality, and some strange things start happening. And basically what happens is the intent of these masks is to essentially destroy the world, basically to kill people en masse when they put this on Halloween night. So the people who are making the masks are trying to perfecting their formula for killing people. And one of the most memorable things was the eerie theme song for the commercials. They would have these Silver Shamrock commercials throughout the film, and of course everybody would get jazzed up and want to buy the mask. But I know it's a little cheesy. The soundtrack is an abomination, but there's just something about the film to me that is so eerie, and it's this race against time to stop this from happening because they're supposed to air this commercial on Halloween and everybody's supposed to watch, and it's essentially going to be sending out all of these messages, activating the masks to devour the people who are wearing them. And I just thought it was really cool.
Now, just to clear things up, my problem with the film is not so much the film. My problem is that it forced a connection to the Halloween films. It has nothing to do with Halloween. They're basically trying to cash in on the Halloween title.
That's true.
But it's not a Halloween film. If you named it the Crazy Mask Exploding Snakes Coming Out of Your Head movie, I think I would like it a lot better. But it's not. It's Halloween 3, and everybody will bring you cash to the box office, and you're not getting a Halloween film.
Hey, it's marketing, man.
Well, look, I mean, if they were trying to draw some attention to the project, then use the name, let them, I say. I mean, it gave them name recognition. I have no problem with it. I'm with Steve. I think at least at the time, I guess the thought process was that the Michael Myers franchise was finished. Mm-hmm. So Carpenter has, I believe, a sort of, I don't know if he's an executive producer. I honestly don't know if he has anything to do with the story. But, there are worse things in life. I mean, it gave it the little name recognition.
Well, then by those standards, the next cheesy horror film that comes out, I'm going to call it Psycho 6. Because I'm cashing in, baby.
Uh-huh.
Okay, do whatever you want.
Well, on that note, Carlos?
Yes. My first film is something called The Mist. And when it first came out, I actually didn't see it in the theater. I caught it on DVD, I guess about half a year later. And it's directed by Frank Darabont, who's we all have seen all his films probably. He dabbles in horror, supernatural, heavy drama. He goes back and forth. But this particular film is based on a Stephen King novel. And this isn't the first time he's done Stephen King. He's done Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. Mm-hmm. So he does have a track record with Stephen King. This particular story is about, once again, we talked about this before, some weird virus type of thing going on where this mist descends on this town and people start disappearing and people barricade themselves like in a little supermarket and they're trying to get out, but there are these creatures in the mist that are, I guess, eating them or killing them or whatever. But you don't really see too much of what the creatures are. You just see the movie's basically about these people and how they all turn on themselves. People that are friends or somewhat neighbors or somewhat not very neighborly. And all of a sudden these new alliances form in the supermarket and how they all try to get out of there and what direction they all go. It's not like Survivor in hell, if you will. The film has a very controversial ending because it is not the ending that you saw in the novel if you read it. Frank Darabont gave it this twist ending at the end that it just kicks you in the gut. What they do to you at the end of this movie, the audience, it's unbelievable what they do. And you haven't seen it, right?
I haven't seen it, no.
You definitely see it. As a matter of fact, I read an interview with Stephen King that he was like, this is the only time that I was actually happier with the way somebody else ended something I wrote than the way I wrote it. And to outdo Stephen King, you got to really pull something out of your ass to do that.
Right. Right.
The other reason why some people might want to get into this film or watch this film by Frank Darabont is also because he now is a big shot with The Walking Dead. And people are rediscovering his work. And you can kind of see this is his horror roots. This is how he does horror. When they released this on DVD, I believe they gave you an optional black and white version because he also said that when he wanted to do the film, he wanted to do it in black and white because he saw it as one of these old classic 50s horror films. But the studio wouldn't go for it because they don't want to try to sell a black and white film. But when they did a special edition of the DVD, they released it, I think with either the flip side or a second disc where you can watch the whole thing in black and white. And apparently, from what I hear, I haven't seen it yet in black and white, it's a completely different experience. He said it's much creepier and it's just a different vibe that you'll get from this film.
We'll have to check it out.
Sounds cool.
How about you, Steve? What's next?
Well, for me, just to kind of riff off Steve talking about Halloween 3, this film co-stars one of that film's actors, Tom Atkins, who a member, I guess you could say, of the John Carpenter stock company. And the film is Night of the Creeps, which I believe came out in 85 or 86.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I didn't see it back then. I didn't see it until it came out on Blu-ray last year.
Really?
Really, honest to God. And there were a few films that even escaped my notice. And I instantly took to the film. It's a real throwback to 1950s horror films.
Isn't the tagline something about Night of the Creeps, your boyfriend's not dead?
Your date is here, but the bad news is he's dead.
He's dead, right. I remember the trailer on TV back in 85, distinctly.
HBO used to play the crap out of it. I remember when I had HBO back in the 80s, And it was like, even the movie you mentioned before, Return of the Living Dead, same thing with Night of the Creeps. This is one of these movies that kept just replaying and playing. I kept watching and watching.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, my friend Ray loved the film. And at the time, I was not a huge horror fan. And so a lot of the things he recommended to me, including the original Evil Dead. So, but many years later, I came to this film and, it's a great throwback. And the effects are on the cheesy side, but they're effective. It's pretty gory. And again, it also injects, which I think is a thread for the films I'm talking about, injects a little humor into the proceedings. Tom Atkins is hysterical. I would go so far as to say it's probably his signature role. And, it's just, a bunch of kids, not prom night. I think it's a sorority thing, and all the guys are coming to pick them up. And there's been this something is unleashed that's been in some cryo freeze for X number of years. And, these things possess you, these little disgusting creatures that look like the worms from Star Trek 2. And I just found it to be, again, a pattern is emerging here in the mid-'80s where they're kind of not completely taking themselves seriously and using a great character actor. And I thought it was great. So how about you, Steve? What's your next film?
Well, in keeping with the not too seriously theme, I want to talk a little bit about the film Fright Night, which is actually being remade. So I'm curious to see what they're going to do with that. But the film starred a whole bunch of people. It had William Ragsdale, I believe, was the protagonist.
Who now is on Justified.
On Justified, that's correct. It also starred Chris Sarandon as the vampire.
Chris Sarandon.
And Amanda Beardsley
from Married Children.
From Married with Children.
Amanda Beasley?
Beasley. And who else? Stephen Jeffries, who was in a film called Heaven Help Us.
Oh, yeah.
And last but not least,
the great
Roddy McDowall.
Great.
I mean, this film was just amazing. They took a subject that was near and dear to my heart, which was public access, throwback type shows where you have a host and, they're showing the midnight horror picture. And Roddy McDowall played a character called Peter Vincent, Vampire Killer. And it turns out that William Ragsdale's new neighbors actually are vampires. Well, Chris Sarandon is a vampire. And he sets his sights on William Ragsdale's girlfriend.
Right.
And I find the movie extremely quotable. And, again, I didn't see it in the theater. We saw it on VHS, but it's
a fun movie.
It's a fun movie. I mean, you don't know where it's going to go, and the effects were pretty graphic. There's a scene where Stephen Jeffries is turned into a vampire, and he gets stabbed in the heart by Roddy McDowall, not to give away the film, but his death scene is extremely graphic. And they play the whole spectrum of emotions because you go from one moment where you're hysterical to, and Roddy McDowall really plays into all of these emotions because you see it on his face. You see him.
He's like a Vincent Price type of character.
He is like a Vincent Price character.
Yes.
But he's sympathetic for this character. I mean, he killed him because he had to, but it was just amazing. So
this is
I
also
highly
a movie,
it.
one of these 80s films, kind of like Gremlins in a way, where it's supposed to be one thing, but it's also something else. Gremlins was supposed to be a kiddie fun kind of film, but it also has a dark mean streak in it. And this film has the horror part, but it's also fun and friendly at the same time. It's weird.
And it's very sexual as well.
Yeah.
Yes, very. You could say the same thing about An American Werewolf in London, kind of kicking off that whole horror/comedy subgenre.
Right. The only thing I love about Fright Night is the music. Brad Fiedel did the music, the same guy who did the Terminator soundtracks. Excellent, excellent music. I always look for it, and I have it, and I love it. I wish the guy would still be working. Apparently, he retired already. My next film in the list would be The Crazies. Now, again, this is a current movie that came out maybe about a year ago. And from what I understand, when it came out, they were saying, oh, this is a remake of an old Romero film. And I'm like, well, Romero, I only associated with, Night of the Living Dead type of films. But apparently he made a film, I guess, back in the 70s or something called The Crazies about some kind of infestation in a town and how everybody starts to go crazy or whatever. Never seen it. But for one reason, I got interested in this one. The trailer they showed looked really creepy and kind of like zombie-ish. You get that one by one, the town turns kind of deal. But the star of the film is Tom Oliphant from Deadwood and Justified.
Tim
Oliphant, I'm sorry. Which brings us back to Justified again. I love that actor. He always seems to play the same character. He plays what else?
Yes.
A sheriff. Okay, that's all he ever plays. He's the lawman. He's always the lawman. But he plays it so well. And when you take an actor who's very good at playing a cop, like a southern type of sheriff, and you throw him in a somewhat of a zombified theme, it's just great. I just ate it up. I love the film. It's creepy. It's scary. It's different. It's not zombie rules. It's a different kind of rules. It's more of a virus kind of rule. you know, and it has a really tricky little weird ending, which is a good little extra. Again, I recommend this to you guys if you haven't seen it. Really creepy stuff. And it actually got some good reviews, which was another reason I was like, what? A horror film with good reviews? You know, you don't see a lot of that.
Just a side note on Tim Oliphant, 2 other appearances. He was in Go, the Doug Liman film. He played the drug dealer.
Yeah.
And he was also in Scream 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is that the one where they go to the film school, or is that Scream 2?
Yes.
Yeah, he was in Scream 3.
Wow.
He played one of the other students in the class.
He did a movie, I think, called Hitman, that he was bold,
Yes.
but I've never seen it, and I'm actually considering it
bad.
just because it's him.
Yeah, it's not bad. Based on a comic.
Wow. What's next for you, Steve?
Well, my last 2 films are from the same director, and I'm going to start with the earlier effort, Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, which was made, I believe, in 1992. And it's near and dear to me because it's one of the films, I think, when we started having the Geekfests back in the day that I showed you guys. And this is, pre-internet. There was a buzz about it in horror magazines, and my friend Ray saw it and said, this is something you have to check out. And most over-the-top exercise in horror comedy that I think I've ever seen.
There's definitely a theme to your picks, I believe.
Yeah.
He's right, though. I think I did pee my pants when I saw that.
And it makes Evil Dead look like a Disney film, as far as I'm concerned. And it's extremely quotable. It takes that comedy element, interjecting it with the horror. It's not even that scary. It's a gore fest. And it has effects that are what I would consider to be lovably cheesy. There's a sort of Harryhausen feel to some of it, and the blood and the gore. The last half hour of the movie is just the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's basically the plot, such as it is some sort of a rare rat monkey thing. It bites somebody.
Isn't it always a rat monkey?
Yes, and it just spreads this infection or disease throughout 1950s New Zealand, and it's insane. The film is insane, but there were the seeds of Peter Jackson's genius. You can see them in that film. The same way you can see it in Sam Raimi and Evil Dead.
I'm glad you saw them. I didn't see the seeds. I was just mortified.
I think Tony was mortified. I can't believe he still does. So, Steve, what about you? What's your next one?
Well, my next selection is a film entitled Silver Bullet. And the movie stars Gary Busey.
Yeah.
Of Celebrity Apprentice fame before his motorcycle accident.
Before his face slid off his face.
Yes, exactly. Also stars a gal named Megan Follows, who played Anne in Anne of Green Gables. And last but not least, the late, great Corey Haim played a young boy who was confined to a wheelchair. And it's a very simple story. It feels almost like you're reading a book. The girl does...
Stephen King.
Exactly. Hence the reason why they did a really good job of translating a story into a film, I thought.
Because the story was kind of like a kid's story. It was like It wasn't a novel.
It was a novella
type. Right. It was a different style of writing for a Stephen King story.
I don't think it was in different seasons. It might have been in one of the other collections that Stephen King wrote. But the story centers around this small town and just everywhere America, and it's very Puritan, and everyone goes to church. And it turns out that some of the people in the town start disappearing, and they think that it's a bear or some sort of wild animal, but it turns out that the priest in the parish is a werewolf. So the young boy, Corey Haim, and Megan Follows, the brother and sister, suspect that it is the priest, and they go about trying to convince their mother and their uncle, who is played by Gary Busey, that it is indeed him. Nobody believes them, and the finale of the film is very suspenseful, and I just love it. It's a quaint little film, but it does have very terrifying moments, but at its center, it definitely has a heart. There's a sweetness to the film that you just don't see people being able to pull off in a horror film.
Right. Definitely one of these 80s, for me, one of these latest HBO play it endlessly in the afternoon type of film. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it on cable.
And I have yet to see it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Oh, you should see it.
Good,
not seen it.
Good Busey.
It's good Busey.
Well, my next film is one that I think I've talked to at least Livona about. It's called The Collector. And
yes,
this is a movie that I saw the trailer online 2 years ago, let's say. And it's a premise movie. And the premise is a burglar breaks into a house. And while in the house, he realizes that the house is being used to slaughter people or something. And all of a sudden, the house is completely full of booby traps and he can't get out of the house. It's from the guys who apparently made Saw, I believe, which off the bat, that would probably drive most people away from this film. But it is one of the most inventive, original horror films I've ever seen because it's the reverse of most of the things you see. The burglar is the good guy. The things he finds in that house, it's incredible. The bad guy is really a creepy guy that, the movie ends and you're still not sure what the hell just happened. But it's got that whole, setting traps in a house, which was the original Saw gimmick of the weird traps and how to get out of them, and you have to do certain things to get out. Well, it kind of has a little of that. But one of the best things about the film is the fact that they have not made sequels about it. You leave it as a standalone film, and it's great. And the lead actor in this film, the only thing I've seen him in since is he's shown up on Ordinary Family. He played like the boyfriend of the lab assistant.
Oh.
He's been around, but he hasn't really broken majorly. But I definitely recommend. This was really a creepy, modern film, and I think you guys would definitely like it. What do you got next, Steve?
Well, next for me is Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, which came out, I believe, in 1996. I'm pretty sure it's, if not Michael J. Fox's last starring role, it's one of his last starring role in film. And it did not do well on its initial release. It has a really great ensemble cast. You have Jeffrey Combs from the Reanimator films. You have Dee Wallace from The Howling and E.T. You have John Astin from The Addams Family. It's a really, again, straddling the line between horror and comedy. Michael J. Fox is this paranormal investigator who works alongside these ghosts played by John Astin and Chi McBride. And I know there's another guy, and I can't remember his name.
It's a poor man's Ghostbuster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're basically working with him to con people. They're haunting. He can see them, and he can, he's got these paranormal abilities, and they're working in concert with each other to, he'll say that he's driving them out of a home. But then, events turn out later that there's this old hospital. Jake Busey is in it. Gary Busey.
He's a ghost.
Things turn from comedy to horror pretty quickly in terms of something that they uncover. I don't want to really go into too much more detail and ruin the film.
Arlie Ermey's in it too, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes.
And a very heavy CGI film, correct?
Yes. Again, an early effort using a lot of CGI and doing, I believe, again, it's Peter Jackson's Weta Digital doing the effects. Robert Zemeckis produced it. I wouldn't call it a flop, but it did not do well on its initial release. And as a matter of fact, Jackson was going to direct King Kong for Universal after this film, but because it failed, Universal pulled the plug.
Wow.
Get the chance to do it until after he did the Lord of the Rings films. But again, it's something I would highly recommend. It has some really genuine scares, but it has a lot of lighthearted moments. Michael J. Fox's relationships with the ghosts, they're very, very funny. John Astin, of all people, who really hadn't been seen much in the years since the Addams Family. I thought he was great, and it's something I'd highly recommend. Steve, how about you?
My final selection is really devoid of humor. It's a straight up, we're going to scare the crap out of you type film. And I know when I saw it, it really spooked me. And the film is Exorcist 3. And there are probably not a lot of people who have seen that movie. And unfortunately, it bore the brunt of the horrible effort that was Exorcist 2 and the negative feedback that film received. But Exorcist 3, just by way of edification, so Exorcist 2, while it tried to pick up on the storyline from the original Exorcist, it really did a horrendous job of that. So Exorcist 3 took the basic premise of the first film and accelerated the storyline years into the future and kind of caught us up with some of the characters from the original film, but also added a new storyline and a new force to be reckoned with. It stars George C. Scott, and it also stars a gentleman named Brad Dourif. Speaking of Peter Jackson, who we've seen in many films since. He was very young at the time. I don't think I had seen him in anything before then. And also stars a gentleman named, I believe his name is Ed Flanders. He was in St. Elsewhere. He plays a priest. He plays I
think he was in L.A. Law.
I think.
Really? I could be wrong.
I think it was, I think it was St. Elsewhere that he was in. The basic premise of the film is, just to recap, the end of the original Exorcist features one of the main characters, Father Damien, essentially telling Satan to leave Linda Blair's character and come into him, and Satan does so, and then that's the end of the film. So here we are. There's a serial killer out and about the Baltimore area, and George C. Scott is assigned to the case, and they're trying to find out what's going on. There are a lot of religious overtones to the spectacular slayings that they have in the film. And again, I recommend seeing the film just to see how creative they do get. And it leads him to an insane asylum, to this patient who is played by Brad Dourif. And we suspect that he is the killer, but in fact, the man downstairs is using him as a vessel to do a number of different things. It also stars Jason Miller from the original Exorcist in a wonderful performance, I find. And it's basically George C. Scott trying to figure out what is going on with all this supernatural activity. How are these crimes happening when all of these people are either dead or seemingly dead or locked up in an insane asylum? So it's some backstory behind the film. It was actually directed by William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist and who wrote Legion, which the film is based on.
That's right.
And it was a very controversial time for him in the studios. I believe they had another director slated, and it didn't work out. They had creative differences, and he decided he was going to step in and direct the film. And I think he did a great job, but the studios didn't agree, and it really didn't get the support that it needed.
You know, you talk about name recognition when we were talking about Halloween 3. I'm fairly certain that originally the title of the film was simply Legion as the book, but the studio rammed the title Exorcist 3 down his throat for the name recognition because they were afraid people wouldn't get the fact that this was a continuation of the original Exorcist story.
As opposed to Halloween 3, which we talked about earlier.
Oh boy, full circle.
Don't get me started again.
You really need to get over that. And that's just my 2 cents.
Now, one thing I remember about that film, I don't know why, but there are 2 shots in that film that remind me of a typical Carpenter film. The one shot of some woman in a gown chasing someone else with like a bone spreader or something, some kind of big
No, it's actually
cutting device.
What I was going to say is you will never look at sculptures the same way again. It is a device used to cut stone. It's a stone cutting shear, and it's used in a very inventive way in this film.
And then there was another shot, I think, if I'm correct, of somebody, I think it was also a woman, in the ceiling, like climbing the ceiling or something.
Like a spider, yes.
Yeah, really creepy to me. It gives me this Carpenter vibe for some reason.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, but definitely one of my favorites. Cool. And I have it on Laserdisc still.
Wow. Now, if we could only find a device to play it.
Yes.
I have 3 if you need one.
Bragger. My last film is one that I'm pretty sure most people haven't seen, but you guys are sick of me telling you about it. It's something called Near Dark.
20 years of this.
Yes, and my revenge in that film is the fact that the director of the film got an Academy Award a year ago.
Catherine Bigelow.
That's right. It was one of her first films put together, a quick, it almost feels like a Western, but it's really, some people describe it as a gothic Western vampire film. And it has basically the majority of the leftover cast from Aliens, because they shot it right after they shot Aliens. All of these ex-Cameron people jumped over and did this Texas-based vampire film, completely different rules than your typical vampire film. They kind of made up their own rules of how they die, what hurts them, how they're affected, when they're allowed to go out and when not, and all that stuff. A very visually different film. It's not just a splatter fest that you're dealing with. She likes to frame the shots. She has an eye for certain things. She went on to do many other films after that, not obviously as successful as what happened to her with The Hurt Locker a year ago. But those actors, I love those actors. As a matter of fact, the lead actor, Adrian Pizarro, who used to be on Heroes a little over a year ago. I met him once, and he was doing like an autograph session, and this is in the middle of the Twilight craze that's going on everywhere, that still is going on. And I'm like, forget all this Twilight crap. Near Dark is it, man. And he was like, you're right. That's right.
and he also, actually, there's a picture of him looking at us right now.
There he is.
In Carlos's office, but also the star of the little scene Fox show Prophet.
Oh, well, that's a whole other show we can do.
Oh, yeah.
Another weird, creepy stuff that we have to explore in another day. But I love this film. Bill Paxton, another one of my, as we mentioned in previous podcasts, Bruce Campbell to Mr. Vivona is my Bill Paxton. He's the man. And in one of his earlier roles,
the Spurs,
the young guy, and then that bar scene, man, he's just nuts. And it was basically an unmarketable film. It was a beautiful looking film, but marketed almost like as a slasher film. You could not market that film, but I love it. Every time the new format comes out, it's one of these films I buy. Whatever they come up with tomorrow, holocrystals. We'll buy it in holocrystal after Blu-ray or whatever the hell else they invent.
And Lance Henriksen was in that too.
Lance Henriksen, Janet Goldstein. A lot of these ex-Alien people.
And who was the young girl?
Jenny Wright, who was the only known credit. The only known credit other than that is the Pink Floyd's The Wall, apparently. You don't see her a lot, but yeah, she was the love interest in the film. But yeah, Lance Henriksen, he was also pretty cool in it. Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. I'd like to thank both of our Steves, Steve Avon and Steve Laux. We will see you again next time on another episode of Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
Adios.